I'm a 32-year-old woman, and I've been planning my dream wedding for over a year now. My fiancé, Andrew 34M, and I got engaged last summer after dating for 3 years. We knew almost immediately that we wanted to get married on the anniversary of the day we met. It just felt right. It took us months of searching, but we finally found the perfect venue, a historic mansion with beautiful gardens, the kind of place I'd always imagined. It was expensive, sure, but it was worth every penny. We booked it a year in advance and locked in the date. It felt like everything was falling into place. Now, here's where things get complicated. My cousin Vanessa 30F has always had a bit of a competitive streak. Growing up, she was the kind of person who would find a way to outshine me at every major event. If I got a new dress, she'd show up with a designer one. If I got a promotion at work, she'd brag about a new side hustle. It's exhausting, honestly. But I tried not to let it get to me. Family is family, right? Andrew and I sent out our save the dates about 6 months ago. We were so excited, and it felt like a huge milestone. Everyone in the family received one, including Vanessa. I thought everything was fine until a few weeks later, when Vanessa made a surprise announcement at a family dinner she was engaged. It was so sudden. I mean, she hadn't even mentioned dating anyone seriously, and then out of nowhere, she's flashing a diamond ring. The family was overjoyed, of course. I was happy for her too, but something felt off. It just seemed rushed, like she was in a hurry for some reason. I tried to brush it off, but things got worse. Just 2 weeks after her engagement, Vanessa announced her wedding date. And guess what? It was the exact same date as mine. At first, I thought it was a joke. I literally laughed when she said it, thinking she was kidding. But she wasn't. She acted completely oblivious, like she didn't know that was the date I had already chosen. I couldn't believe it. I'd sent out my save the dates months ago. There's no way she didn't know. Naturally, I tried to talk to her about it. I pulled her aside during a family gathering and asked why she picked that date. She gave me this wide-eyed, innocent look and said it was purely a coincidence. "Oh, I didn't realize it was the same date," she said, as if it hadn't been a topic of conversation for months. It was hard to believe. I told her that we'd already booked everything. The venue, the caterer, the photographer. Changing the date now would be nearly impossible without losing a lot of money. Vanessa just shrugged and said, "Well, it's too late for me to change mine now." The family started weighing in after that. My Aunt Vanessa's mom thought it was cute that we'd be sharing a wedding date, like it was some kind of bonding experience. She kept saying things like, "You two are so close. It'll be such a special day for the whole family." But I felt blindsided. It wasn't cute or special to me. It felt like yet another attempt by Vanessa to steal the spotlight. Some relatives even started suggesting that we merge our weddings into a joint celebration. The thought of it made me sick. I'd spent over a year planning every detail of my wedding, and now I was supposed to share it with Vanessa? Andrew, bless his heart, was completely on my side. He offered to move our date if it would make things easier, but I knew how much we'd already invested, emotionally and financially. Changing the date would mean losing our deposit on the venue, and it was booked solid for the entire year. The thought of starting from scratch was overwhelming. Plus, why should we have to change anything? We picked our date first. It wasn't fair. The stress started getting to me. Andrew and I began arguing more frequently, mostly about Vanessa and the wedding drama. I was losing sleep, constantly thinking about how to handle the situation. It felt like no matter what I did, I was going to end up the villain. If I insisted on keeping the date, I'd look petty. If I changed it, I'd be giving in to Vanessa's manipulative tactics. I was stuck. Then, to make matters worse, Vanessa decided to post about her wedding date on social media. She made this long, gushing post about how excited she was to get married and tagged a bunch of family members, including me. It felt like a slap in the face. People started commenting things like, "So sweet that you and Sophie are sharing your special day." I was mortified. It looked like we'd planned this together, like it was some kind of joint decision. I felt humiliated. That's when I realized I couldn't just let this slide. I wasn't going to let Vanessa steamroll over my plans without a fight. This was my wedding day, a day I'd dreamed about for years, and I wasn't going to let her take it away from me. I decided I needed to take a stand and figure out a way to show everyone what was really going on. I started digging into Vanessa's sudden engagement and the timing of her announcement. If she wanted a battle, I was ready for it. This was just the beginning. Update 1. Auntie. After that disastrous family dinner where Vanessa announced her wedding date, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. I've known Vanessa long enough to sense when she's up to something, and this felt like one of those times. So I started digging. First, I went through Vanessa's social media profiles, the usual posts about her engagement, gushing about her fiancé, Dan 35M, and photos of them together. But something caught my eye. In her older posts from just a few months ago, there was no sign of wedding planning. In fact, she'd posted about a summer trip she was planning for the following year, mentioning how she wanted to focus on traveling before settling down. It didn't match up with this sudden rush to get married. Why would she cancel her plans so abruptly unless something pushed her to do it? I decided to ask around, starting with a mutual friend who has known Vanessa for years. We chatted casually, and I brought up how excited I was for both of our weddings. That's when she slipped up. She mentioned that Vanessa had originally talked about a spring wedding next year, but changed her plans right after I sent out my save the dates. The friend didn't realize what she'd just revealed, but it was all I needed to confirm my suspicions. Vanessa didn't just pick the same date by coincidence, she did it after finding out about mine. Things got even weirder at a family barbecue a few days later. Dan was there and he looked miserable. He was sitting alone with a drink, clearly avoiding the group. I couldn't resist, so I went over to say hi. We talked for a bit, and I casually brought up wedding planning, asking if they'd picked a venue yet. He sighed and admitted they were still scrambling to get everything together because the date was so close. He seemed stressed, like he was in over his head. I asked if they'd always planned to get married this year, and he hesitated before mumbling something about how things just happened fast. It was obvious he wasn't thrilled about it. Later, while I was helping clean up, I overheard my aunt talking to my mom about Vanessa's financial situation. Apparently, Vanessa's been having money problems for a while, credit card debt, overdue bills, you name it. My aunt mentioned that Vanessa had been hoping for some financial help from family with the wedding expenses. That's when it clicked for me. Vanessa might be using the shared date as a way to get more family support and gifts, piggybacking off my wedding plans. It felt like she was trying to make her wedding a joint event without my consent. I knew I needed proof before confronting her, so I started gathering evidence. I went back through old texts, looking for anything that could show she knew about my date before she picked hers. I screenshot her social media posts, showing the timeline of her engagement announcement and date reveal right after my save the dates went out. I even managed to overhear her complaining to a friend on the phone about how expensive her wedding was turning out to be, hinting that she hoped our family would pitch in more since it was such a big family event. Andrew, of course, was on my side the whole time. He suggested we keep moving forward with our plans and not let Vanessa's antics ruin our day. But just in case, he proposed having a backup plan ready in case she tried something else. He even called the venue to double-check our booking and managed to secure a few extras for us, a small gesture to make sure our wedding still felt special despite everything. Then came the most unexpected part. One night, out of nowhere, I got a message from Vanessa's ex-boyfriend. We hadn't talked in years, so I was surprised he reached out. He said he heard about the wedding drama through mutual friends and felt like he needed to warn me. He claimed Vanessa has a history of pulling stunts like this, sabotaging friends' events, making last-minute changes, and manipulating situations to make herself the center of attention. According to him, she did the same thing when a friend of theirs was planning a big birthday party. Vanessa managed to turn it into a joint celebration, without anyone else's consent, leaving the friend fuming. Armed with all this information, Andrew and I decided to have a private talk with Dan. We invited him out for coffee, making sure Vanessa wasn't around. He seemed relieved to see us, like he needed to get something off his chest. When we brought up the wedding date conflict, he admitted he felt pressured. He didn't realize it was the same date as ours until after Vanessa had already announced it. He looked exhausted, saying he felt cornered into going along with her plans. I knew I had enough evidence to confront Vanessa, but I didn't want to come off as petty or vindictive. I needed to handle this carefully. So I started crafting a post for social media, something that would explain the situation without directly naming her. I wanted to make it clear that we'd chosen our date first and that we weren't planning to change it, no matter what anyone else did. The next day, my mom called, saying she wanted to have a family meeting to sort this out. Apparently, Vanessa had been talking to everyone, trying to spin the story in her favor. I wasn't surprised. This was typical Vanessa, always playing the victim. I decided to leak a few of the screenshots and text messages to close family members beforehand, just to plant the seed of doubt about her intentions. It worked. By the time the meeting happened, several relatives were already questioning Vanessa's motives. She looked visibly flustered when confronted, trying to laugh it off like it was all a big misunderstanding. But Dan wasn't laughing. He turned to her, right there in front of everyone, and asked why she felt the need to sabotage her own cousin's wedding. The room went silent. I stood my ground and posted my carefully worded message later that evening. Within hours, I was flooded with support, and Vanessa's story started to crumble. Update 2. A week after the family meeting, I thought things might calm down, but I was wrong. One evening, I got a call from a friend who works at a local wedding venue. She'd heard about the drama between me and Vanessa and figured I might want to know something. Apparently, Vanessa had booked a different venue originally, one of the popular ones in our area, but she canceled it just a week after I sent out my save the dates. My friend had seen the cancellation come through and was surprised because Vanessa had been so eager to book it. The timing was suspicious. I asked her if she could send me any kind of proof, and she emailed over a screenshot of the cancellation confirmation. The date of the email was exactly 1 week after I posted about our wedding date on social media. It felt like the final piece of the puzzle. Vanessa had clearly known about our date and decided to sabotage it intentionally. I showed the email to Andrew that night, and he was stunned. He knew Vanessa could be petty, but this was a new low even for her. He suggested we bring this to the family immediately, but I wanted to handle it carefully. I didn't want it to look like I was starting more drama without solid evidence. Meanwhile, Dan was growing more and more suspicious of Vanessa's behavior. He confided in Andrew at a family gathering, saying he had started noticing inconsistencies in her story. Vanessa had been accepting gifts and money from the family, making it sound like it was a joint celebration with us, even though we hadn't agreed to anything like that. Dan looked exhausted, like he was finally beginning to see through Vanessa's manipulation. I decided it was time to confront Vanessa directly. I texted her, asking if we could meet for coffee. I made it sound like I wanted to clear the air and put the drama behind us. When we met up, she acted cheerful, like nothing was wrong. I let her talk for a bit before sliding my phone across the table, showing her the screenshot of the venue cancellation email. Her smile faltered. She tried to laugh it off, saying it was just a coincidence, but she looked nervous. Her hands were shaking as she reached for her coffee. I kept pressing, asking why she would cancel her original venue and then choose the same date as mine. That's when she cracked. She started to cry, accusing me of trying to ruin her wedding and steal the spotlight from her. She said she chose the same date because she thought it would be special for us to share it as cousins, a bonding experience. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was trying to spin this as some kind of sweet gesture, but her tears and shaky voice told a different story. It was jealousy, plain and simple. Later that night, my parents decided to call another family meeting. They wanted to put an end to the drama before it spiraled even further. At the meeting, I presented the evidence, the screenshot of the venue cancellation and a timeline of events. Vanessa looked like a deer caught in headlights. She stammered through her defense, trying to play the victim again. The room was filled with whispers and side glances. Some family members started piecing together the truth, while others looked at me like I was the one causing trouble. That's when Dan stepped forward. He'd had enough. He turned to Vanessa in front of everyone and asked her why she felt the need to sabotage my wedding date. His voice was calm, but you could see the frustration on his face. Vanessa broke down, finally admitting that she was jealous of my wedding plans, the attention we were getting, and the fact that everything seemed to be going perfectly for me and Andrew. She said she felt overshadowed and wanted a way to make her own wedding feel just as special. It was like a bomb went off in the room. Half the family looked shocked, while the other half seemed like they'd expected this all along. My parents were furious, demanding to know why Vanessa couldn't have just picked another date. Vanessa's parents, on the other hand, started downplaying the situation, saying it was all a misunderstanding and that Vanessa was just caught up in the excitement. It turned into a shouting match with family members taking sides. It was chaos. After the meeting, Dan pulled Vanessa aside. I could see them arguing quietly in the corner of the room. He looked calm but firm while she was wiping away tears, her face red and blotchy. I found out later from Andrew that Dan had given Vanessa an ultimatum: either they moved their wedding date, or he was calling off the engagement. Vanessa tried to manipulate him, saying he was being unreasonable, but he didn't budge. He was done with her games. That night, Vanessa went on a rant on social media. She posted this long, passive-aggressive message talking about how certain people, obviously referring to me, couldn't just be happy for her and were trying to tear her relationship apart out of jealousy. She framed herself as the victim, saying she was just trying to have a nice wedding and couldn't understand why I was being so petty about the date. The post blew up, with friends and family commenting, taking sides, and fueling the fire even more. I chose not to retaliate. Instead, I posted a simple message thanking everyone for their support and reaffirming that Andrew and I were sticking with our original wedding date. I made it clear we weren't changing our plans, and I didn't mention Vanessa at all. The response was overwhelming. I got messages of support from relatives and friends who could see through Vanessa's act. The next day, Dan moved out of the apartment he shared with Vanessa. He packed his things and left, telling her he needed space to think. He wasn't sure if he could go through with the wedding after everything that had come to light. I heard from mutual friends that Vanessa was devastated, but honestly, I wasn't surprised. She'd pushed things too far, and now she was dealing with the fallout. It felt like the tide was finally turning, but I knew this wasn't the end. With Vanessa, it never is. Update 3. I thought things might settle down after Dan moved out, but I was wrong. The very next day, I started hearing from mutual friends that Vanessa had been spreading rumors about me. Apparently, she was telling anyone who would listen that I only chose my wedding date because it was the most popular date of the year. She made it sound like I was being petty, trying to grab attention for a trendy date instead of it being the anniversary of when Andrew and I first met. It didn't make any sense, but that was typical Vanessa, twisting the story to make herself look like the victim. The gossip spread fast, and soon enough, I was getting calls from family members asking why I was making such a big deal out of the date. Vanessa's parents jumped in on the action too, defending her at every turn. They started saying I was bullying Vanessa, accusing me of being jealous and insecure. They painted her as the sweet, innocent cousin who was just trying to plan her dream wedding while I was out to ruin everything for her. It was frustrating to hear, especially since they knew the truth but chose to ignore it. A few days later, Dan reached out to me. He apologized for everything that had happened and admitted he felt trapped in the whole situation. He said he'd been blind to Vanessa's behavior for a long time, but after everything came out at the family meeting, he realized just how manipulative she could be. Dan told me that this wasn't the first time Vanessa had done something like this. He shared stories of past incidents where she'd sabotaged friends' events and tried to steal the spotlight at family gatherings. It was a pattern, and he felt embarrassed for not seeing it sooner. Dan's revelations were eye-opening. He said that Vanessa had a habit of making herself the center of attention whenever she felt overshadowed, whether it was at a friend's baby shower or a cousin's graduation party. He even mentioned a specific incident where Vanessa convinced a friend to change her birthday party plans last minute so she could have a bigger celebration instead. It was always the same story. Vanessa would manipulate the situation to make herself look like the victim while quietly taking over the event. Hearing all of this, I realized I couldn't sit back any longer. I started compiling everything I had: screenshots of Vanessa's social media rants, text messages from Dan confirming her behavior, and even old messages from family members who had previously complained about her antics. I decided I needed to confront Vanessa publicly. This had gone far enough, and I was done playing nice. My parents, sensing the tension building, suggested another family meeting. They wanted to resolve the issue before it spiraled even further out of control. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I agreed, hoping this would finally put an end to the drama. The meeting was tense from the start. Vanessa showed up looking smug, like she was confident she'd already won everyone over. I didn't waste any time. I stood up and presented the evidence, starting with the screenshots of her social media posts where she had called me out indirectly, accusing me of ruining her wedding plans. I read out the text messages from Dan, where he admitted that Vanessa had pressured him into picking the same date as ours and had been misleading the family about their wedding plans. The room was silent as I laid out everything. Vanessa's expression changed from smug to panic. She started yelling, accusing everyone of ganging up on her. She was crying, screaming about how unfair this was, saying I was trying to destroy her life. It was a full-blown meltdown. Family members who had been on the fence before started whispering among themselves. They were beginning to see through her act. For the first time, the majority of the family sided with me. They could see how far Vanessa had gone to manipulate the situation. A few relatives spoke up, calling her out for her behavior, saying they'd noticed the same patterns over the years. It was like a dam had broken, and everyone was finally willing to admit what they'd been ignoring for so long. Dan took a deep breath and stepped forward. In front of everyone, he announced that he was officially calling off the engagement. He said he couldn't marry someone who would go to such lengths to sabotage her own cousin. Vanessa was speechless, her face pale. She tried to plead with him, but he just shook his head and walked away. Vanessa's parents, who had been her biggest defenders, were furious. They started yelling at Dan, accusing him of breaking their daughter's heart. Then they turned on me, blaming me for stealing Vanessa's happiness. It was chaos, but I stood my ground. I knew I had done the right thing by standing up for myself, even if it meant creating a rift in the family. After the meeting, Andrew and I finalized the last few details for our wedding. We felt closer than ever, united by everything we'd been through. We decided to go ahead with our original date and venue. We weren't going to let Vanessa's drama ruin our plans. In the days following the confrontation, Vanessa went silent on social media. Friends and family noticed her absence, and the gossip started to die down as people realized the truth. It was like the storm had finally passed. Dan reached out to me one last time. He thanked me for exposing the truth and said he was grateful that I helped him see Vanessa's true colors before it was too late. We ended up forming an unexpected friendship, bonded by the shared experience of dealing with Vanessa's manipulation. It wasn't something I had planned, but it felt like a silver lining after everything that had happened. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The drama was over, and I could finally focus on what really mattered: my wedding and starting my life with Andrew. Update 4. Aria. I thought I'd finally reached the end of this nightmare after Dan called off the engagement, but it wasn't over yet. One morning, I woke up to a message from Vanessa's mother, Susan. I wasn't expecting it. Susan has always been a bit distant, never really getting involved in the drama between Vanessa and me. The message was long, paragraphs upon paragraphs, almost like a letter. It started off apologetic, but quickly turned into something else entirely. Susan explained that Vanessa's behavior wasn't as random as it seemed. She shared some painful family secrets, things I'd never known before. Apparently, Vanessa grew up feeling overshadowed by her older siblings. Susan admitted that she and her husband were overwhelmed with their own issues back then, barely giving Vanessa the attention she needed. They were struggling financially when Vanessa was young, and her older siblings were the ones who got most of the focus because they were in school sports and had more visible achievements. Vanessa, on the other hand, was quiet, always trying to get noticed but often overlooked. The message painted a picture of Vanessa that I hadn't seen before, a girl desperate for validation, willing to do anything to be noticed. Susan even mentioned that Vanessa's manipulative tendencies had shown up early, like the time she threw a fit at a family party until everyone sang happy birthday to her, even though it wasn't her birthday. It was all starting to make sense, but it didn't make it any easier to digest. Susan's message wasn't just about explaining Vanessa's behavior. She also gave me a warning: Vanessa might not be done yet. According to Susan, Vanessa has a history of escalating conflicts when she feels cornered. She hinted that Vanessa could try something drastic, especially now that the engagement was off. The whole thing left me with a sinking feeling. Just when I thought it was safe to relax, here was Susan, telling me to watch my back. Not long after, Dan called me. His voice was strained, and I could tell he wasn't doing well. He said the breakup with Vanessa had taken a toll on him, more than he'd expected. He admitted that he felt stupid for not seeing the red flags sooner, especially after everything Vanessa had done. He asked me what he should do next, how to handle the fallout. It was clear he was struggling, feeling guilty and unsure of himself. Despite everything, I found myself trying to comfort him. I told him he wasn't responsible for Vanessa's actions, and that he needed to focus on healing and moving on. It felt strange offering support to someone who'd been part of the problem just a few weeks ago, but Dan seemed genuinely lost. Andrew, on the other hand, wasn't as sympathetic. He warned me not to get too involved. He said we'd already been dragged into enough of Vanessa's mess, and the last thing we needed was to be pulled back in. He was right, of course, but it's hard to ignore someone in distress, even if they're connected to all this drama. Things took another turn when Vanessa started reaching out to mutual friends again. I started hearing whispers that she was spinning a new story, telling everyone that I was the one who sabotaged her relationship with Dan. She painted herself as the victim, saying I'd gone out of my way to ruin her engagement out of jealousy. It was exhausting to hear, but not surprising. This was Vanessa's classic move, rewriting the narrative to make herself look like the one who'd been wronged. Then came the public apology. I didn't expect it, but one morning, there it was: a long, emotional post from Vanessa on social media. It read like a mix of an apology and a plea for sympathy. She talked about how she'd been struggling with mental health issues and childhood trauma, blaming her actions on these struggles without ever really taking responsibility. It was all about how hard things had been for her, how she felt misunderstood and alone. The apology was passive-aggressive, subtly throwing blame back at me for misinterpreting her intentions and making her feel cornered. The family was split. Some relatives felt sorry for Vanessa, messaging her with supportive comments about how brave she was for speaking out. Others saw it for what it was: another manipulation tactic. My phone blew up with texts from cousins and aunts, half of them asking if I'd seen the post and the other half telling me not to take it personally. It felt like the family was being torn apart even more. Susan reached out to me again after that, begging me to forgive Vanessa. She admitted she was afraid Vanessa might spiral out of control if she didn't have family support. Susan sounded desperate, and I could sense the fear in her words. It was heartbreaking in a way, but it also made me angry. I couldn't help but feel like they were all making excuses for her, like they were enabling her behavior instead of holding her accountable. Andrew had enough. He told me straight up that we needed to focus on our own happiness and our wedding plans. He said he supported whatever decision I made about Vanessa, but he didn't want her anywhere near our wedding. He was firm, reminding me that this was supposed to be our special time and we'd already let Vanessa take up too much of it. I knew he was right. I decided to send Vanessa a private message. I acknowledged her apology, but I made it clear that I didn't trust her anymore. I told her I was willing to forgive but not forget, and that I wouldn't tolerate any more disruptions to our wedding plans. I hit send, half expecting another dramatic response, but there was nothing. For the first time in months, there was silence from Vanessa. No social media posts, no phone calls, no drama. It was almost unsettling, but I couldn't deny the relief I felt. It was like the eye of the storm, quiet, but I had a feeling it wasn't over just yet. Update 5. The morning of my wedding, I woke up feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. I'd been dreaming of this day for so long, and after everything that had happened with Vanessa, I was determined not to let her ruin it. Andrew and I had taken precautions, just in case. He'd asked a couple of friends to keep an eye on things at the venue, acting as unofficial security. We didn't want any surprises. I knew it sounded paranoid, but given Vanessa's track record, we weren't taking any chances. The ceremony was everything I'd hoped for. The weather was perfect, sunny with a light breeze. We exchanged vows in front of the historic mansion, surrounded by family and friends. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. There was no sign of Vanessa, and I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd decided to stay away after all. The relief I felt when we were pronounced husband and wife was overwhelming. It was perfect, almost like a fairy tale. But fairy tales don't usually have uninvited guests lurking at the edge of the dance floor. During the reception, as Andrew and I were mingling with guests, I caught sight of someone standing at the back of the venue. It was Vanessa. She wasn't dressed up like she normally would be at a wedding. Instead, she wore a plain outfit, her hair unkempt, and she looked disheveled, almost like she'd just rolled out of bed. The sight of her sent a wave of whispers through the crowd. People were glancing her way, unsure of what to do. My parents noticed her too and quickly came over, asking if they should have her escorted out. I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment I dreaded. But instead of having her thrown out, I decided I needed to confront her one last time. I didn't want this hanging over my head anymore. I nodded to Andrew and we walked over together. As we got closer, I could see that Vanessa had been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, her makeup smudged. I asked her why she was here. Vanessa didn't look at me at first. She just stood there, staring at the ground. Then, in a shaky voice, she started talking. She admitted she'd been struggling for a long time, dealing with severe depression. She said she'd felt like her life was falling apart, and when I sent out my save the dates, it hit her like a punch to the gut. She realized how far behind she felt in her own life. No stable job, no real friends she could rely on, and a relationship that was crumbling. Vanessa confessed that she chose the same wedding date because she wanted to feel like she was part of something special. She said it was the only way she knew how to cope, to latch onto my plans and make them her own, because she couldn't stand the thought of being left out, of being overshadowed once again. I stood there, stunned. I'd always known Vanessa was competitive, but I hadn't realized just how deep her insecurities ran. Then came the twist I never expected. Vanessa looked me in the eyes and told me she'd been diagnosed with a serious mental health disorder a few weeks ago. She didn't go into detail, but she explained that her erratic behavior and manipulative tendencies were symptoms she'd struggled with for years. It was only now, after the engagement fallout with Dan and the family confrontation, that she'd finally sought help and received a proper diagnosis. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions, sympathy for her struggles, anger at how far she'd gone to disrupt my wedding, and a strange sense of relief that maybe there was an explanation for everything she'd put me through. Before I could respond, Andrew stepped in. He thanked Vanessa for sharing and acknowledged how hard it must have been, but he made it clear that while we were sorry for what she was going through, it didn't excuse her actions. He asked her to leave so we could enjoy the rest of our night. Vanessa nodded quietly, wiping away tears. She apologized one last time and walked away, disappearing into the night. The family watched her go, unsure of what to say or how to react. It felt like the end of a long, exhausting chapter. I stood there for a moment, feeling a strange sense of closure. The confrontation hadn't escalated, and there was no dramatic scene, just a quiet exit that left everyone in a state of shock and confusion. Andrew and I returned to the reception. We decided to put it behind us and focus on the celebration. The rest of the night was a blur of laughter, dancing, and love. I knew the drama with Vanessa wasn't completely over, but for now we had this moment, and I wasn't going to let anything ruin it. In the days following the wedding, the family was left grappling with the truth about Vanessa's condition. Some relatives reached out to her, offering support, while others distanced themselves, unsure of how to process everything. The gossip slowly died down as people began to realize the depth of Vanessa's struggles. It wasn't just petty jealousy, it was something far more complicated and heartbreaking. As for me, I decided to take a break from the family drama. Andrew and I went on our honeymoon, leaving it all behind for a while. We needed the time away, just the two of us, to start our married life on the right foot. I reflected on everything that had happened, vowing to protect my peace and focus on our future together. It had been a nearly impossible situation, but I knew I'd handled it the best I could. In the end, it wasn't the perfect wedding I'd imagined, but it was real. It was ours. And despite everything, it was still the best day of my life.